don't want to ditch key staff because you never get them back.
Well, Jess is really lucky that she works. I didn't know this. That firm in Exeter is one of the oldest systems in the whole of the country.
Yeah.
And they had a reputation. They don't make it redundant.
No.
So they've got a very good reputation looking after their staff. So they don't want to lose it.
Yeah.
So what they've said is that we're going to have to, and they haven't got any debt.
No.
So we're going to manage everyone as best we can. Jess is lucky in the sense that she runs that team. She's the only one that can do some of the stuff.
Yeah.
So she has to do it.
Yeah.
She's taking a pay cut, 10%. But
Well, I think everyone has if they want to keep their job.
you know, I think so further. The company agreed to pay 80% of what I'm going to get paid. I don't make any favors, but whatever. You know, it takes for us to live.
But yeah, I think that's how most people feel now because
I'm not doing anything.
exactly.
I mean,
If you're not doing anything and you're just staying at home, you're not spending
I
money.
put one tank of fuel in the car in 2.5 months. So
go in the other room. Dave?
It's Paul.
It's Paul.
Yes.
Right.
Is this the, yeah, this is presentation I'm giving today.
Right. Okay, that's fine. Sorry, I'm wrong. I'm reading someone else's name at the same time. So you got in okay?
Yes, it's starting in 10 minutes, isn't it? That was the...
Yeah, you're breaking up slightly a bit. So whether... Might just settle down in a minute. Often does.
Yeah.
It's just your voice that's... Is it the microphone that...
Let me just see if the audio headset earphone, headset microphone. I can hear a little bit of a, I don't know, some kind of feedbacky noise.
Yeah, that's it, and it's sort of got a bit of a sort of fizzy sort of sound to it.
I'll log off and I'll try and log back on again and see if it makes any difference. You never know.
You shouldn't need to do that, but you can try.
The other thing I can do is open up the laptop and use the internal microphone on that one. I don't know if that would make any difference. I'll click this button and see if it makes any difference. Then I won't need the headset. Can you hear me at all?
I can. You probably need to turn it up a bit.
Yeah, I don't know if I can. It's going to be just the microphone will be the microphone. The only way I can turn it up is to turn it louder. Is it better?
It is. You haven't got the echo. You haven't got any of these, have you?
I can.
That's it. That's coming through okay now.
It is, isn't it? I can hear it myself.
Yeah, that's coming through okay now. That's
can
fine.
I try sharing my screen and just seeing if that works with the first slide, and then I'll have because the thing that is always a challenge here is to get the notes. I don't need the notes, so I can do the slideshow without the notes. If I start the
slideshow should work all right. Have you got it on PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you go to PowerPoint as you would normally do, and then open it up with the easel so you can give a presentation, it normally works absolutely fine.
So I always use presentation view, and as soon as so I've got it on the presentation view, and I will share screen.
Yeah, share the screen. That's it.
And I will share screen one. Share. How's that?
That's coming through absolutely fine.
So I can just let me just click on there and just see if it, yeah, okay.
Yep. So as long as it's working, the one thing I would say is that when you're speaking, the other people can't see you, but of course they can see your presentation. So before you start, you might just want to let people see your face.
I do that. I've obviously got you as well. Are you seeing?
Yeah, you will. You see the panelists, because you and I are the panelists, we can see each other, but attendees, which is what everyone else, actually won't be able to see other than the screen. So on screen share, all they can see is your overheads. But I just think it's nice at the beginning if people can see you, because it's very difficult. You can't see other people, they can't see you. So it's a sort of unnatural human thing, not to have a bit of eye contact with people.
There was a way, and I haven't looked at this, where you can have your video in the top right-hand corner of the screen. But I don't know if that's when we publish them to YouTube. That's
yeah, there are different ways. The problem is they often fall over. You know, I'm happy to do a bit of experimentation, but the other way is a split screen yourself, and there's all sorts of things. But
yeah.
So what I would suggest is at the beginning, Andrew will probably introduce you if he's into Andrew Carpenter, and then what we can do is people will see Andrew. I will demote him. I will take myself off screen and just put the logo up. So it then just becomes you, and then once you switch over to your presentation, you behind your presentation. So have you used Zoom before? I'm sure you probably have.
Yeah.
On this function here, we have three things that the attendees will have, which will be a Q&A menu in which they can type questions.
Yeah.
Can you see that on your toolbar? I will encourage people to use that if you don't mind.
Yeah, definitely.
And just keep an eye on that, and you can answer questions as you go along. There's another way that we can bring people in later on or at any time, which is raising hands, and then I can open up. Yeah. And then, of course, there is the chat, which I encourage people to use. But from your point of view, it's not easy to keep looking at chat and Q&A. So I'll encourage people to use the Q&A, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Do you want to give a presentation and then try and open it up for conversation, discussion at a later point? Or
so the presentation will last probably about 30 minutes. And what I'd like, or I think would be useful, is at the end of that is for, I don't know if either yourself or Andrew could say, well, we've had lots of questions in, and if there's loads of them, you can pick a theme and pick out some from a theme. Maybe repeat the question and then I could answer it. I don't know if that would work.
I can do that. So if you want to give your presentation then without questions, I'll do that. I'll get people to put questions and we'll take it at the end. And I'll encourage people, if they want to own their question, to come in. Unfortunately, some people choose the anonymous function because they just want to sit hidden. So that's fine. What we're going to try and do is keep it to the hour. Okay. Yeah. But if there are unanswered questions, rather than hang on at the end, shall I tell people that you will gladly answer those by email or whatever means afterwards?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
So the presentation should 40 minutes, and then that'll leave some time for. So I'm not going to be running over. There is a lot of content. There is a lot of slides. But I've done this presentation a couple of times now. So.
Fine. Well, Andrew's joined us. We find that people pitch in from about now, but around the midday thing. So I will get going. This is being recorded, so people will be able to listen to it again or whatever. So if they miss the beginning or whatever,
Morning.
bad luck, really. Morning, Andrew. Oh, hello, dear. Another one of these Hawaiian shirts.
Yeah, well, I like to keep people sort of amused on a Friday. I've decided Friday is to put a smile on your face there, you know?
Absolutely.
You're right, Andrew.
Yeah, this is the second of 5, so be prepared.
What? Is it, you've only got 5 shirts? Is
5
it?
of these. 5 of these.
5 of those.
Yeah, 5 Hawaiian type shirts.
Sure you can buy a few more.
No, not in lockdown. So how many are we expecting today, Howard?
Well, we were up to nearly 80. So on the basis of what percentile register and who turn up, I would say we should be getting near 60-ish, yeah, with a bit of luck.
Yeah, good. I see they're coming in all the time. Are we going to do the normal format then? Howard, you give the house rules, I give an introduction, and then away we go?
Yeah, absolutely. I've said with Paul, we'll try and keep it to an hour. He says he's got a presentation about 30 minutes. We'll take questions.
No, I was listening in. I've been listening in.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So we'll try and do that, okay?
Yeah, that's good.
You see, yesterday we had 58 registrants and had 52 people logged in. It was amazing. Yesterday afternoon, you were one. Did you stay to the end?
Who, me?
Andrew?
Yeah. I thought it was great. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've known Matt for years.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because he's a referee and I was a referee. Not that I was at his level, but as soon as he moved down to the West Country, we sort of struck up a friendship. So yeah, I mean, I think actually refereeing, you do learn things pretty quick.
Oh yes, well, you're not exactly liked by anyone.
No, I mean, what I learned as a referee is that you had a quick snap decision in terms of how to deal with people, management. Yeah. So were you going to give them a bollocking? Were you going to book them? What were you going to do? How you were going to take the heat out of a situation? You had to make a quick assessment on people. Mostly you got it right, but not always.
he recounted the tale where he clearly didn't get it right.
Yes.
Anyway, a minute to go. We got 26, 27. They're coming in.
We're up to 30. Yeah. Okay. So, well, let's give it till another minute until your introduction. And then
well, what I should do is at 12 o'clock, I should give my introduction, then hand over to you.
Okay.
And I think what we'll do is I'll demote you back to attendee and bring you back in later on.
Yeah. No, I'm cool. I think I was hearing if you do the Q&A as Paul asked, I'll dip out again. turn my
Will
camera.
you be here at the end? Or?
Yeah, I'll be here.
That's fine. I'll bring you back in at the end. I'm sure you'll have a question. So
yeah, that's fine. Okay. Yep. So I'm just looking on my website to make sure I get the next few right for next week.
well, I can tell you what we got.
Well, I know we got Mates in Mind on Tuesday, but I think that's only the one, because Thursday is yours, isn't it?
Yeah, so there's just two, and you'll be pleased to know that I've actually now got all of the information from the reluctant providers for the following week. So
yes. Yeah, so I've got Michael Cheney on the website, but I haven't got the Friday one, the 15th.
Yeah, I think that's Ernst & Young.
Yeah, James, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, there's four of them actually going to be involved, so it should be quite an interesting panel session, that. Anyway, for those of you who have joined, welcome to you. I think we'll get going. We're going to do a strict hour, so I'm not going to waste too much of your time. In terms of today, you, as an attendee, will see three key buttons. First is a Q&A button. This will allow you to write your questions, and later in the session, after Paul has given his presentation, I'm going to run through those questions. So we'll aim to get all of those questions answered, and hopefully more will spring up. There is a raise hand button. So when we get to the Q&A, if people would like to get involved in a discussion, I can promote not just people through their microphones, but also through their camera. And if any of you want to communicate with me or other people, or panelists or whatever, there is a chat function that you can use. So without much more ado, I'm going to hand over to Andrew Carpenter, and then he'll hand over to Paul. Welcome, and see you later.
Thank you, Howard. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the latest in our series of webinars that we're bringing you. For those that are here for the first time, if I can remind you that these webinars are being brought to you now by a group of organisations, started life before Easter as Constructing Excellence Southwest, Constructing Excellence Midlands, and the Structural Timber Association. And we've been joined by Constructing Excellence Wales and the Housing Forum. So 5 of us now collectively bringing you a couple of webinars a week, which we're all getting very used to now. So midday on a Tuesday and midday on a Friday. Originally, we were discussing purely coronavirus issues or subject matter. We've decided now to extend that, to broaden the agenda. And I'm delighted that Paul Chatwin is here this afternoon from Cundall to talk about the very important issue of zero carbon or net zero. What's interesting is the conversations and meetings, virtual meetings, that I've been in recently with the Construction Leadership Council seems to suggest that most of us don't want us to revert to business as usual. We don't want to come out of the coronavirus pandemic with the industry in the same place that we went in. We want to ensure that the new norm takes into account important subjects like net zero, like quality and compliance, like fair payments, like health and well-being, like digital and off-site technologies, etc. So topics that we've been grappling with within the sector for many, many months and years. There's a real opportunity, I think, now to ensure that we don't go back to business as usual. In fact, the Construction Leadership Council has got a subgroup chaired by the Chief Exec of Seeker, looking at what the new norm could and should look like. And as I say, a very important part of that agenda will be what we're going to be talking about in this session. So without further ado, thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Paul.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for that, and welcome everybody to this presentation today. I will share my screen now, and hopefully you'll be able to see the slides. So this is a presentation that my colleague gave on Earth Day a few weeks back, Simon Wyatt, and it's the back of a presentation that we started at the beginning of the year, which was to do with the climate crisis and zero carbon in buildings, and we gave a joint presentation to the BCO, the British Council of Offices Committee, with the UK Green Building Council. So it's been tweaked slightly, as I say, to include kind of the more recent COVID impacts. Right Just a little bit of background. One of the benefits, I suppose, of the viewpoint that Kundal has is that we're an international business. So both climate change and COVID impacts, we've been able to see how this has affected different parts of the world and take the best from different parts of our offices and experiences across the globe. We are also a multidisciplinary consultancy, and this brings, again, added benefits. It's not just sustainability, but air quality, and as Andrew mentioned before, health and well-being also plays a massive part in the current crisis. Being working across most sectors in the industry, it helps us find the best in each different sector and bring it to other sectors. So that is also a key strength and help in the business. So the way that Kundal approached this and the way that we like to frame this is that we need to be thinking about both people and planet. In the current pandemic situation, people is at the forefront, and it has been as well with the movement towards well-being, both mental and physical well-being, with the well-building standard and the like. So there's been a shift or a focus on well-being. But at the same time, in the climate emergencies and the declarations over the past 12 months, there has been a big shift in planet, both with David Attenborough's Blue Planet, with Greta Thunberg, single-use plastics. All of these are very much planet-related focuses. So you can't focus on one. You need to make sure that the mental well-being, the physical well-being of people and the planet is considered. So just taking a little bit of a look back, we should be most of us should be familiar with 5 years ago and the Paris Agreement. This was when the leaders of the world came together and said, in order to tackle the climate crisis, we need to limit average global warming by 1.5 to 2 degrees. No more than 2, let's target 1.5. That was 5 years ago. What we have seen is that we are currently at a 1 degree temperature rise on average compared to post-industrial levels. So to get to the 1.5 to the 2 degree target, there is a big challenge. There's a limited chance. There's probably only 5% chance that we can actually hit this target. The reality is with all of the governments where they've declared their targets, is that we're going to be nearer the 3.2 degree temperature rise by 2100. And finally, anecdotally, I suppose we've got a much chance of hitting a 5 degree temperature rise as we do as hitting the current Paris Agreement. So we obviously we need to avoid that, and we need to make sure that that does not happen. We've seen the impact of severe weather over more recent times. This is an image from Osaka Airport, which flooded during a typhoon and also flooded during the Rugby World Cup. It has a significant impact on a business, an airport, a local economy when things like this happen because of climate change. I suppose, fortunately, being Birmingham based, we're quite a bit above sea level, so this will be less of an impact, but still you can have flooding due to flash flooding. And that's what we've seen more in the Midlands, I suppose. We've seen the flash flooding happen, and we've also experienced across the UK the heat waves 2018 and the impact that that has. More widely across the world, the forest fires in America and in Australia have also highlighted the significance of what is happening across the world as far as climate change is concerned. So over the last 12 months, Extinction Rebellion have raised the awareness of the climate emergency and lobbied with their feet, I suppose, with the strikes and the actions that we've seen across the country. This has led to, just taking a look back, I suppose, a year. Last May 2019, the UK government declared a climate emergency. A month later, they changed the Climate Change Act. So instead of the previous target being, we're going to reduce emissions by 80% by 2050 compared to post-industrial levels, they've now said we're going to raise the bar and it's going to be net zero emissions by 2050. This is a significant step. The difference between the 80% and the net zero was industries like aviation, which are more challenging to get to the net zero position, and also buildings with the existing building stock is more of a challenge to get to net zero. So the 2050 net zero emissions target by the UK government is quite a strong and challenging target. What didn't help, I suppose, was about a month later, the Committee on Climate Change provided a report that showed that the government was short of the 100%, short of the 80% target, let alone 100%. So that didn't help, I suppose. Since this time, we've seen most major UK cities declaring carbon emergencies and declaring that they will be zero carbon or net zero by a certain point in time. So in Birmingham, it's 2030, more local to where I am. In Solihull, it's 2030. And the West Midlands Combined Authority are looking at 2041 and developing plans in order to try to achieve that in their local areas. The government, which we've already talked about, has said that by 2050 there will be net zero. So this is one of the kind of the leading key drivers. In addition to the government, you have local authorities, like I've mentioned, and with planning regulations, they will be setting their own challenges for zero carbon. But also, and quite a key one, is investment. Investment, like the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, started by Mark Carney, now chaired by Bloomberg, are saying to investors or banks that we're not going to be providing funding for projects unless they have a plan for climate change. So that could be mitigation as well as adaptation. There needs to be clear items related on projects that will meet their plans, or else they're not going to provide the funding in the first place. Second to that is developers. The large developers that we work with, some of the developers are signing their own declarations. They want to be seen to be leaders in this field too. They're signing commitments with the World Green Building Council and the Better Building Partnerships. We're supporting them with working out what that actually means to their businesses and their developments. And it just, again, it's a show of solidarity that we will be applying this to the industry. And lastly, one of the key drivers I wanted to raise was the occupier. This has hit London probably more so than the other regions, but tenants now are signing up their own zero carbon aspiration plans. They are basing them on UN Sustainable Development Goals, and they are turning around to their landlords and saying, what are you doing to support us? I'm going to move and leave unless you do something to help us achieve these targets with the landlord-related energy consumptions and climate change stuff. So a big push there I see from the occupier, from the tenants going forwards. So last year, we need a plan of how we're going to actually deliver zero carbon buildings in the industry. The UK Green Building Council released a document with the net zero carbon buildings definition. And this was last year, and this was a good, well thought strategic document that laid out a map of how zero carbon should be considered for any project. Other World Green Building Councils had plans out first, but a lot of the World Green Building Councils now are looking at the UK Green Building Council's definition, framework definition, and adopting this, because it is quite a good document. And there's three key things there. The key things being that new buildings should be net zero carbon in operation by 2030. That we should be considering net zero in operational energy for all of the existing building stock by 2050. And that the new buildings, their embodied carbon to build them should be net zero by 2050. So those were the three key messages. One thing to say about the framework document is that its focus is on two things. Its focus is on the embodied upfront carbon emissions associated with constructing the new building, and also with the operational energy. So making sure that you drive down consumption. The other three boxes there for maintenance, repair, demolition, waste, and the actual reuse of the structure at the end of its life is the whole life carbon picture, which we'll find with other plans that are coming out will be used. So the terminology that we need to be familiar with is the upfront embodied carbon, the operational carbon, and the whole life carbon. The UK Green Buildings Framework definition laid out some simple steps. These steps apply to refurbishment projects and new projects. They simply start with reducing the amount of embodied carbon in the construction impacts. Things like using timber and reducing the amount of concrete or material is a good starting place. Then you look at reducing the operational energy. Then you consider renewables on-site, off-site, and then once you've done all of those first 3 steps, you see what residual carbon you've got left. If you want to be zero carbon, you offset that by purchasing offsets, carbon offsets. Finally, and probably most importantly, is that you publicly disclose your building. What happened with the UK Green Buildings Framework definition coming out was some businesses who understood their carbon footprint declared themselves to be zero carbon by offsetting all of their consumption, regardless for how hungry the buildings may be for energy consumption. So more recently, what we've seen for offices is that the UK Green Building Council has clarified minimum targets, which I'll talk about in a while. The other thing to consider with net zero is how much can the UK deliver via its wind and green electricity generation. What we need to be doing is balancing out our consumption in buildings as well as other industries with what can be supplied by the green wind turbines and the like. So this is about net zero being a position where our consumption meets what's generated via renewable targets. So the orange line indicates the increase in green technologies to generate electricity, such as wind turbines, and the purple line illustrates how all sectors, not just buildings, need to reduce their footprint to get to an alignment in 2050 to meet the government's targets. As I mentioned, in order to do this, there are targets for energy consumption. You cannot just offset an energy hungry or an energy intensive building and say that you are zero carbon. So what we're seeing here is the UK Green Building Council at the start of this year said that for commercial offices, you need to be 55. You need to design your buildings to achieve no more than 55 kilowatt hours per square meter per year for your building. What goes through your meters divided by your floor area cannot be above 55. And if you achieve that, then you can be deemed to be zero carbon. At the same time, around December and January, December last year and January this year, the LETI, which is more of an individual body of professionals, were also looking at zero carbon and how this could be achieved in both schools, offices, and commercial offices, schools and residential. And they came up with similar targets, the 55 kilowatt hours per square meter per year being the one for commercial offices. This isn't by fortune that they came up with the same number as the UK Green Building Council. It's similar people working across both streams that come up with these numbers, but it helps give a unified approach to what zero carbon definitions are when we talk about zero carbon going forward. Not just is the 55 kilowatt hour the operational energy, but you also got the embodied upfront carbon emissions, which is a different metric. It's kilograms of CO2 per square meter. And we need to drive that down from the 1,000 current to a future 600 to 350, which is shown in the pink there on the graph. But in order to get the existing offices, or sorry, the new build offices from a position of roughly 160 to 55 is the challenge that we face. And it is a challenge, but it can be done. And one of the most frequently asked questions is, what is the cost to do this? Is it going to cost us a fortune to do this? And I'll be answering that question through this presentation, in that it doesn't have to cost to do this. If you're reducing certain aspects of a building, reducing materials, then that can have cost savings. Finally, I've talked about UK Green Building Council, and I've also talked about LETI. Last year, REBA, the Architecture Association, released its own targets for net zero and included water there. So you've got operational energy, embodied carbon, and water usage. And again, the numbers tally. We've got this 2030 target of 55 kilowatt hours per square meter. So again, it's reinforcing that unified number, not having lots of different people in the industry telling you different numbers, but trying to get a consistent and clear message to us all so we know what we're working to. Then COVID happened. So at the start of the year, we were seeing a huge increase in the climate awareness, the emergency declarations, and we'd got the documents in place to tell us what it meant and how to achieve it. And then a big span has been put in the works with the outbreak of corona. And we've seen across the globe the lockdown, the impact that that has had in reduced emissions from transport, from rail, from industry, and the like. And suddenly, even in the news this morning, we hear the term exponential curve. What we've seen is the R number, they're calling it at the moment, which is if one person infects 2 or 3 people, then you get this exponential increase in mortality due to COVID. This isn't the first time that we've seen an exponential curve, but we do know that this looks like a crisis. I remember probably 15 years ago now, Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, where he showed the same exponential curve due to carbon emissions, due to human impact, and what that meant as far as the climate emergencies. But what we haven't seen, I suppose, is the significant action that has happened, that we've had with COVID, with the lockdown, apply to the climate change. It is starting to get more and more focus as the impacts of climate change is happening, but I suppose what we need, I suppose, is something like what we've had now with lockdown applied to in the right way, the starting of the economy back up in the green way, with the right stimulus in the future, so that we can see some action for that. So we need to not go back to business as usual. We do need to take action to consider kickstarting the economy and making sure that we're considering how that can influence the green measures going forward. On the kind of air quality side of things, in India we can now see the Himalayas, and across China there's been a significant reduction in air pollutants worldwide, which is a positive, I suppose, in a very testing time. The impact of COVID is predicted to be a 5% reduction in global emissions. It's the third highest you can see on the graph, reduced global carbon emissions due to crisis. But to put that into perspective, in order to meet the Paris Agreement, we need 7.6% year on year for the next decade. So it's a significant challenge that we're faced in order to try to limit the rise of the temperature to 1.5 degrees, which is probably why the expectation currently is that 3 degrees is more likely. Looking again, the calm before the storm, this is more to do with the financial crisis and the economic crisis that's maybe on the horizon. We saw a huge impact in share prices due to COVID and Corona, and unemployment figures are set to be double figures across Europe, and 20% in America is being forecast, and the construction sector isn't going to be, is going to be part of this picture in the future. So there are going to be trying times ahead, and what we do need is this stimulus package that I mentioned. We do need to see a focus on governments creating jobs in the construction industry around the challenges of climate change, in order to make sure that when the economies do kickstart and bounce back, that they're going in a not business as usual, but in a new trajectory to try to align with the emergencies that we've got. What has happened historically was in the last economic crisis was 15% of the stimulus packages that government provided was targeted towards green deals. So it needs to be more than 15%, I suppose, is the message for the next one. And also countries across the world will look at their natural resources, will look at stripping their natural resource assets in order to generate economies, and that has its obvious impacts on the natural economy side of things. So I suppose prior to COVID, we were in a good position, and we knew as an industry how we should be applying the zero carbon agenda. We had the documents out, we had the benchmarks, we had the key drivers kicking in. In the UK, there's probably been a limited number of projects that have actually achieved the kind of targets that we've been talking about, but there are countries like Scandinavia where they have low energy buildings, less dense occupation, I suppose, and in Australia as well, with different methods of targeting buildings, we've seen significant carbon emissions. So there are opportunities out there. We do know how to do it. We have got the tools. We just need to make sure we apply them as we come out of this crisis. So what Cundall have done, what we are promoting at the moment, is as we are seeing, we're still seeing an increase in People coming to us, I'm seeing requests for proposals that look at zero carbon. We've created an image here, there's 7 steps here of how we see that this can be applied. If we keep it to 7 things, then that keeps it simple and people can then grasp with the challenge in a more simpler way. So I'll just talk you through briefly. There's probably a presentation on each of these, but I'll take you through these briefly. The first step is threefold. Look at daylight, maximize daylight. It does depend if your building is urban or rural, and for new constructions, we should be looking at 40 to 50% glazed facades, not the 80 to 100% that we've seen historically. If you get 40 to 50% daylight facades, if you get the plan of the building in the right form, then you can have good daylight, not too much solar gain in summer, not too much heat losses in winter, and a pleasant working environment as well, as far as the health and well-being side of things. So the starting point is to maximize and optimize daylight. The second thing in the fabric first approach is to enable natural ventilation. Now, in urban environments, there may be external air pollution and noise pollution that limits the ability to open windows. But where we're looking at these buildings in city centres, the future will have less emissions. There'll be less fossil fuel, gas boilers releasing pollutants. There'll be less cars releasing pollutants. There will be more of an ability to open the window. So we should be thinking about enabling natural ventilation. There may be times in winter when we need the windows shut and heat recovery is the best, least energy position. And in summer, we may also want to close the windows and introduce a bit of peak lopping so that we can provide comfort without excessive use of cooling energy. But for those shoulder seasons, for most of the year, and people tend to like the ability to be able to open a window when the time is right, when the conditions are right, and naturally ventilate their offices. We mustn't forget insulation. We must insulate and focus on air tightness and thermal bridging in order to minimize those heat losses for where appropriate. Passive house standards are an excellent way to have a low energy building, but they need to be applied where appropriate. So achieving passive house accreditation or looking at the passive house standards and targeting the U values and the air tightness and the thermal bridging is a good way to start. And again, as I mentioned previously, this could add cost to a project where you look to achieve those increased levels of air tightness and thermal insulation. But if you're mitigating the need for a heating system, there can be cost reductions, not only in the capital cost, but also in the operational energy associated with those heating systems. The second part of the puzzle is to reduce the design of the heating and ventilation and cooling systems to match a reality load. Just taking firstly winter conditions, we would in an office typically heat an office to 21 degrees in accordance with the BCO. But if we can reduce that set point by 1 degree or 2 degree, provide local trim heaters where appropriate, that will have a reduced energy emissions. In summer, if we extend the 24-degree BCO kind of criteria for offices and allow that to go to 25, 26 or even higher, making sure that we maintain thermal comfort. Thermal comfort is very important in these buildings, but you can achieve comfortable environments by air movement. So use of fans, ceiling fans, local fans can mean that we can overall reduce that energy consumption. Now the BCO guidance for offices have loads there that we are to size our plant, our lighting equipment, and those loads are based on any tenant coming in, so it's worst case scenario. And typically, historically, we've sized the plant to meet those BCO requirements because that's what the industry requires, but that has led to oversizing of ventilation, cooling and heating systems where the reality may not need that in most cases, some cases, but most cases not. If you don't have oversized kit, it'll work more efficiently, it'll cost less, and there could be savings there. And we know how to do this, so we can look at the real energy. We can target the 55 kilowatt hours per square meter demand profile using the simulation packages, using design for performance, which is a standard that has been introduced to the UK off the back of the Australian neighbour scheme. Design for performance is being piloted across buildings in the UK, and the outcomes of those will help refine and make sure we all know the good so we can apply it to our buildings too. Eliminating fossil fuels, there is going to be a ban on the use of boilers in the near future. Boilers will still have a place at the moment. There are alternative options such as heat pump technology, and in new buildings it's easier to start down a fossil fuel free type of solution, but with existing buildings it's more of a challenge. Providing renewables on site and providing as much as possible is also key. Just to note, the 55 target, these energy utilization targets, should be met without using PVs. The whole point is that we get our demand down to a very low position, and then we do apply the renewables, we do apply storage where we can, whether it's on-site or off-site, to further reduce our footprint. And as our operational energy becomes reduced, the focus will shift to the embodied carbon and the materials and the associated carbon emissions in buildings. And we also need to consider the whole life picture, not just the upfront embodied carbon emissions for the materials, but also the refurbishment and the replacement. You may look at higher intense carbon materials that last longer when you look at the whole life picture. So if you're not replacing a facade every 20, 30 years, but every 50, 60 or 100 years, then with a more carbon intensive product to start with may be a better solution. So you do need to consider all facets. And there's been some good documents produced over the last 3 years from both RICS and REBA on how to do embodied carbon measurements. We've written a tool for the Hong Kong government, which is being used, which assesses the carbon emissions associated with buildings. And we've written a tool for the Greater London Authority, which will come into planning and is just out for consultation at the moment. And finally, on the embodied carbon picture, we do need to think of this circular economy. We do need to think about the products that we're using at day one and how they can be reused at the end of the building's life. The public disclosure part, I feel, will have a very strong impact on the whole industry in reducing the emissions. And again, we need a consistent measure, a consistent system of capturing the data of all of the emissions associated from embodied, operational to refurbishment. And this is happening. So the ICE are looking at providing a database which could be used to actually have a leaderboard. And if you've got a leaderboard, you'll be able to see how your building's comparing to others, and then there'll be more competitiveness. And also, dare I say, the government may use this also as a taxation for those that are lower down on the leaderboard. So when that comes into play, which will come into play, owners of buildings just need to understand that their assets value could be diminished if they haven't got this kind of low carbon foresight. That's been a lot of information on existing buildings and the kind of 7 steps to reduce carbon in order to meet that 55. But the biggest issue is definitely decarbonising existing assets. So an existing asset might not be at the 140-ish mark, but might be 220 on average. And the goal is to get to 55. The red element of the slide shows the fossil fuel usage and the blue is the electrical. So how do you get from 220, quartering the energy consumption down to 55 for an existing asset with existing tenants? And what kind of stimulus package do we have for those buildings? Is it going to be a pot of gold that we can spend on existing buildings? So what developers need to do is they need to consider a plan over the building for that building based on tenants' break clauses in their leases, looking at when the fabric needs a refurbishment or when the plant needs replacement, and then applying a plan. So we are working with various owners of portfolios of buildings. We are taking samples of their buildings, and we are working out, using the design for performance and the embodied carbon tools that we've got and developed over the last few years, a roadmap to make sure that that central plant is efficient, to make sure that it considers defossilizing and looks at the lease breaks and the like. This is my last slide. It's been about 30 minutes, I think, on the presentation. I've tried to keep some time available so that we can open up to some questions. But the last part of this jigsaw is, if we don't do action now, the cost of inaction will be greater later. And this is being recognized by various developers, funders, and the like. So the more that we can share this message, the more that we can apply climate change mitigation and adaptation measures that's reducing the footprint and looking at how we can adapt buildings in the future to the increased temperatures, that would be great. I hope that all works out well. Is somebody, do I stop sharing?
Thank you, Paul. Yes, if you'd like to start opening up your screen so people can see you. We've got a couple of questions that have come up. One of them's been asked by Chris Meadows. I don't know whether Chris would like to actually ask that by joining the panel here so people can see. If you'd like to, Chris, stick your hand up, please, and I'll open both your camera and mic so everyone can see and hear you. So put your hand up, Chris. Oh, come on, don't be shy. Looks like we may have some has a 3-year-old causing havoc in the background. He says, fine, okay, Chris, understand the problems. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll ask the questions. Chris's question, Paul, was, what are your thoughts on the Extinction Rebellion tactics? He then goes on, I love the idea and some of the messages, but locally some of the demonstrations have been farcical, even giving them the benefit of the doubt. I'm sure that their approach of offbeat displays will do nothing to change the mind of detractors. Are they a force for good, and are they getting it right?
It's a brilliant question, Chris, and thank you for that. The lobbyists of government needs to be done in the right way. So I think there's two things here. There's the Extinction Rebellion, which raises public awareness, and by public awareness and voters, that will influence government in a certain level. It will antagonize people with the tube situations that we saw last year. So yes, they can be a frustration, and it might not be the only way. I think what is most important with this is that the industry such as RICS, REBA, LETI, UK Green Building Council, and the members of businesses that really are behind the scenes there supporting those organizations, lobby the government in the right way and try to make sure that our case for green stimulus going forwards is clear and attractive. We can create jobs in this industry if you provide us some stimulus in our industry by insulating, by air tightness, by testing, by measuring, by, you know, all of the contractors from supply chains, all of, not just the professional organizations, but everyone has a part to play. Hopefully that's answered that question.
Howard.
Hello, Andrew.
Yeah, may I come in with a supplementary answer to that? If
Please do. Please carry on.
I think I was probably responsible for introducing Extinction Rebellion to the Constructing Excellence Network when I took a risk last year in inviting speakers to attend both Constructing Excellence Midlands and Constructing Excellence Southwest conferences. So if anyone has any criticism, then you can blame me. I firmly believe that what they've been successful in doing is bringing this critical topic to everyone's attention and getting it at the top of the agenda. In terms of the acknowledgement that some of the actions that have taken place are not in the best interests of the movement, when I spoke to their Midlands speaker, I outlined that I didn't want them to cause any embarrassment to me or CE, because I was giving them a platform to talk to construction industry professionals who, let's be honest, are responsible for a good deal of the carbon dioxide. Now, what he did say to me, Beryl Rodriguez, was that they acknowledged that some of the actions of their movement were not in the interests of the movement, and that they now have an internal procedure they have to go through before any actions or activities take place. So they, as a movement, are aware that some of the things that have happened are not good in terms of progressing the agenda. However, I would say that the speaker in the Southwest at our seminar of over 100, or workshop conference of over 100 construction industry professionals, got a standing ovation after he'd finished speaking. And in 40 plus years of being a member of the construction industry, I have never, ever seen a response like that. So whatever negativity there may be around Extinction Rebellion, I have to say that overall, I take my hats off to them. Thank you.
Okay, I've had a hands up from Rob Lamb, who may want to join the discussion. So I've opened everything up. So Rob, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Howard. Thanks, Paul. Great presentation. Whilst I think your presentation was more focused on the commercial sector than domestic, my particular interest is more domestic. But I think a couple of questions I've got probably apply to both. From a point of view of understanding the impact on the sector that effectively STA represent, and thinking about the fabric first approach to achieving the net zero energy and carbon targets, do you think there's particular sources of information that are good references to understand the impact of air tightness detailing, thermal bridging detailing, the impact on the wall thicknesses and general performance to effectively enable air source pumps and such to work efficiently? Where would you signpost people to? Because I think there's a huge challenge still in terms of understanding of what really needs to be done in terms of detail and design to achieve the standards that are going to be required going forward. So that's the first question. The second one, if I want to throw it in and then you can maybe think about it. The second one is, you quite rightly said that the more we deal with operational energy, the more relevant the embodied carbon becomes in terms of the overall. Timber is, I think, generally recognised as one of the better materials to be using in terms of embodied carbon. Are there any assessment tools that you might, again, be aware of that people could use to do embodied carbon assessments, rather than having to employ specialists to do that, to demonstrate the embodied carbon impacts?
Two excellent questions. Thank you, Rob. The first one for residential and the challenges around air tightness and thermal bridging and insulation levels. There's the two guidance. I think the one that stands out is obviously the passive house. The beauty about the passive house standard is it's spreadsheet based with the PHPP tool, and it focuses on thermal bridges, and you have to apply all the thermal bridges into the spreadsheet. It will allow you to look at different options and alternatives there. So that's one good reference guide. The other reference guide I would push to is the LETI. So LETI has a one-pager, and it also has a 70 to 80-page manual. And in that manual, it has a reference to both individual homes and blocks of flats. So it's got two different residential type targets, and it talks about the kind of measures that need to be achieved for that, and the fact that residential is 35 kilowatt hours per square meter per year is the target there, which isn't as onerous as a passive house, but it's still pretty tight. The second question was about embodied carbon. Embodied carbon assessments and methodology is probably behind the curve at the moment. So we've probably got more tools around about operational energy than we have about embodied carbon. And as I said in my presentation, there's two good documents. There's the RICS document, there's the REBA document, there's the database for the, it was the BAF database, and this is now owned by, I think, the ICE. My structural colleague, Tim Stidwell, kind of leads a little bit on the structural impacts of embodied carbon. We've also got a guy called Chan in Kundal who used to work with Sturgis Architects and has also developed the guides. And he's the one who's kind of doing this. I still feel that it's maybe is a specialist role. I don't think that there is a simple to use guide out there yet. But it's not a high cost service. I know Chan's fees, so it's pretty low cost. What is actually a huge impact in a project? Just finally on Tim's piece with the structural engineer. So structural engineer with the Revit models, and this may be more commercial than domestic, but they have simple ways now where you can link a ton of steel, a ton of concrete, a ton of timber, and it will tell you the impacts on embodied carbon quite quickly using the Revit, the BIM tools, so that you can compare A, B, C, or even hybrids of A, B, and C as appropriate, because timber may not span so far. You might need some structural support. So hopefully that's partly answered some of your questions.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I mean, I don't know whether there's a way of us getting contact details for Chan. I'd certainly be interested in having a conversation with him.
I'm happy to, yeah.
Thank you.
Rob,
help with that.
From an STA point of view, I can pick that one up.
Thanks, Andrew.
Okay. What I would like to do, ladies and gentlemen, is bring Varel Rodriguez into the conversation. I hadn't realised that Varel was on the call. So I was just now talking about me being responsible for introducing Extinction Rebellion into CE, and our speaker is actually in the conversation. So Varel, would you like to just unmute yourself and maybe answer that question that was raised earlier yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, no, interesting question. I think we get asked that question quite a lot, whether if XR is actually making a difference. And I personally think it is. So I joined XR in August last year, just because I've known for a while that there was no major changes or no major action happening on climate emergency. After like studying about it at university, and I thought someone needs to come about and do something. Last year in April, so it's been a year since we had the first rebellion, we had a protest in London, and following that protest in May, the UK government declared a climate emergency. Following that declaration, other businesses followed that lead as well and declared climate emergencies. So we saw architects declare, building services declare, and so that has had a cascading effect onto our subcontractors as well. So it has definitely had a positive impact. It also, I think a lot of the actions also create conversations, so it's not always positive, and I think it won't be, because it is causing disruption, but ultimately we get that conversation, we get people to sort of like talk about that, and one of the bad things is the media obviously doesn't show it in a positive way. The news that gets to the media is mostly negative, at least, yeah, that's one thing to keep in mind. But there's a lot of lobbying happening within XR as well. There's quite a lot of members who are actively sort of trying to discuss with politicians to sort of get the climate emergency to the top of the agenda. And so, yeah, we've got three demands, which is tell the truth, act now, and the other one was citizens' assembly. I won't speak too much about that because it's quite long. But if anyone wants to research about it, if you just type citizens' assembly Extinction Rebellion on Google, I think you'll get more information about that. But yeah, I think also the other thing is with protests and with activisms, we've managed to rule the Heathrow third runway as illegal, and we've also managed to stop Bristol's airport expansion as well. So in terms of like whether it works or not works, I think it does have an impact in some way or the other, not always positive. And I do acknowledge that some of the actions that we've done haven't been in everyone's interests. Like for example, the tube action. In fact, about 98% of the people within XR said we don't want to do that tube action. But because of XR's decentralized nature, because anyone can do anything as long as it's non-violent and like follow the other principles, people sort of choose to do what they want. And I think there's a lot to learn from that tube action, for example. And we're only 18 months old. So we are definitely learning a lot, and any feedback or any help in terms of like improving us or what we should do next is definitely welcome. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Back to you, Howard.
We have one other question, anonymously, so I can't ask anyone to own it, but it reads, a major house builder who will remain nameless recently obtained planning approval for a 700+ unit housing site in Oxfordshire. they have obtained approval for the bare minimum of current building regulations, even though some of these units will not actually be built for 10 plus years. Why can't government and local authorities be more proactive in seeking more stress targets similar to the old Code for Sustainable Homes Level 6?
Thank you for that. There is a loophole which is looking to be fixed with the new round of Part L legislation, and that came out for consultation prior to Christmas. And one of the measures was that when you do a development, which may be over a long period of time, that if you're doing it in phases, each phase has to comply with the regulations in force at that time, so that you're not linked back to something that's 10 years old or 5 years old. So I think that hopefully is being addressed. It is, I suppose, always a challenge for a local authority to try to stimulate their own growth in their areas. I think as most authorities now are declaring climate emergencies, and the planning rules are a bit behind the curve in all of this because they take time to come into force, there is going to be more stringent measures. I know in London, which kind of sets the way a little bit with the GLA, that it is a lot harder now. You have to do a lot more work up front on emissions from fossil appliances, a lot more on the energy, the thermal comfort, as well as what's coming in now is embodied carbon. So I think other authorities will potentially follow suit with that. I'm not saying that the regulations get it all right though, because there was also one which was contended where they were saying that the local authorities couldn't do anything which was more tougher, more stringent than what the building reg said, which goes against the kind of London plan being more stringent, more tougher for the right reasons. So hopefully that'll be addressed in future, but I can't talk for those individual cases, obviously.
Fine. I hope that answers the anonymous attendee's question. If not, please do come back, either by asking the question through the Q&A or by putting your hand up. We've got a question from Adam Peters. I don't know whether Adam would like to ask it live. If so, put your hand up, Adam.
He said yes. He said yes.
He said yes in the chat button. That's okay. I will open it up then. So just bear with me for a minute. There we go, Adam. You should now be able to open microphone, camera. Thanks for joining us.
Hi. Yeah, this has been really, really interesting. Thank you very much. So I'm a third-year student studying a BEng at the moment in civil and environmental engineering. And through my own interest in timber, I'm doing my final project on designing with mass timber. But so far, there's been no timber design taught on my course. And one of the reasons I was so interested in doing it is that when I spoke to other students and to my lecturers and said what I was looking at doing, 12-story residential building from cross-laminated timber, they all looked at me as if I was crazy. Whereas those of the people that are a bit more aware know that this is a very real possibility. Now, my personal feeling is that education should be doing more to encourage this, because we're the next generation of engineers coming through. So we're meant to be facing these challenges. Now, my course is accredited by the JBM, but there's no timber design on it. So I just thought, is this something that, as an industry, these chartership bodies need to be looking at more?
Yeah, it's a good point. And timber will definitely have a part to play. When we look at timber in buildings, we know that they can go taller. We know there's limitations, and then you can introduce concrete or steel to support that. I'm going to struggle to answer your question because I don't know that, but I suppose the only thing I would reflect on is that the stimulus packages, the green packages, the education in the sector, if there's historically in the UK, there's not been that much timber, I suppose. In other Scandinavian countries and the like, there's been more timber. What we need is somebody who knows the most about timber to start really applying that. We know when we do the assessments and they look at embodied carbon, CLT, even if it's shipped in from overseas, which it always predominantly is, hands down wins on the embodied carbon footprint side of things.
Could I step in again, please, Paul, Adam? I think that's something as the STA we could pick up on. We're seeing an exponential growth and interest in the use of structural timber throughout the industry. So traditional timber frame, SIPS panels, CLT and so on. And I think what we have to do as a trade association is remove the barriers that may be there that stops this growth, because obviously for the carbon agenda, it's critical that we use as much timber in construction as possible for the reason you've already alluded to. Yes, so if there are barriers, and if education is one of them, then we need to work on that. So I will take that as an action point for the STA.
Okay.
We have got historic links with iStruct. Would you mind acting as a reference point if I go to iStruct?
Absolutely no problem.
Okay.
More than happy.
But I'll pick that up with the powers that be within iStruct.
Okay.
We'll see if we can get that moving on their agenda.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Thank you very much.
We've got one comment which I can add, which is the problem with CLT structure is the Hackett report. It means that it can't currently be used at height. That's an anonymous attendee who's added that, Andrew, so I don't know whom.
Can I make a comment on that? Because we are working at the moment with MHCLG as the STA. The response to the latest consultation actually has been delayed. It was the 13th of April, but because of the coronavirus pandemic, it's been pushed back to the 25th of May. You're right that at the moment the ban is 18 metres, and they are considering moving that down to 11 metres. What we're asking government to do is to please use the same decision-making process that they're doing so well with the coronavirus pandemic, which is based on scientific evidence and fact. At the moment, the decisions they're making on the combustible material consultation are based on emotion and politics. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say that is in Scotland, they have building regulations that is pretty much the 11 metres situation, but if you can prove through testing, you are permitted to take that up to 18 metres. And as a starter, that's the STA's position in trying to support the structural timber sector. Going above 18 metres, I think, is again, as you've alluded to, is the next phase. Sorry, you wanted to come in, Adam?
Yes, that restriction is only on the exterior wall build-up, though. Right. So you can still use CLT for the entire load-bearing structure, resisting all the lateral loads, replacing the need for steel or reinforced concrete, and then use like a lightweight steel frame just to house a non-combustible enclosure for the building. So it's not about using CLT everywhere. It's just about using it as you know, in as many places as possible,
as appropriate. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
I have a comment from Greg Slater. I have opened his mic, but I'm conscious that we've only got a couple of minutes left. He says, I agree re-timber, but need to consider overheating on lightweight structures stroke fire spread. So that probably just...
Yeah, it's the thermal comfort, embodied carbon, health and well-being, all of it, the people and the planet is the answer. So you've got to think about the planet in reducing carbon emissions, but you've got to think about the person and make sure that you don't sacrifice comfort. So yeah.
But all that is able to be done, Paul, isn't it, in the correct design? All comes down to the design of the product, how it's used.
I love timber. I think timber,
and of course, then erected accordingly. As you know, we think back to the the work that Rob Pannell did.
There was an old building. I say old building. It's old in that it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago in my industry that had concrete radiators, and all these was a timber frame building with slabs of concrete fixed to the soffit, which is a bit of a scary thing when you're walking around. But that was used as a thermal moderator.
Thanks very much. I'm conscious we've got about a minute left. So I think what we need to do is probably close this down. I don't know whether you'd like to close this down, Andrew. Remind us that we have a couple of events for next week.
I would like to, first of all, thank you, Paul. Excellent hour we've just spent. Fabulous information and knowledge that you've able to share with us. So I'm applauding you on behalf of everyone in the webinar. Just to say, I hope the rest of you thought the last hour was a valuable use of your time. I can't think that it wouldn't have been. To say that the next event is on Tuesday, and we're dealing with the exceptionally important topic of mental health. During the lockdown, during this working from home situation that many of us find ourselves in, it does put us into a different position. So next Tuesday, it's all about mental health. And we're going to be joined by Stephen from Mates in Mind. For those of you that were looking forward to the social webinar tonight at 7, where we were going to have an interview with Boris Johnson, unfortunately, for reasons beyond our control, we thought it was appropriate to postpone. I won't say any more than that. It's a personal reason surrounding COVID-19, but it was appropriate that we postponed it. We didn't think it was right to have a bit of fun in the circumstance. But we will be looking to repeat that in the future when the time is right. But from me, from Howard and John, thank you to you too. From Paul, good afternoon. Enjoy your weekend. Cheers.